Welcome back from the break. You're watching NewsX. Let me go back to Sharat Kohli at this point. Sharat Kohli, what should be the priorities for the dispensation now, the new dispensation in Sri Lanka, to try and begin to get the nation out of this crisis that it falls itself in? And apart from, of course, agriculture, which we spoke about earlier, what else needs to be the priority in terms of aid from friendly nations like India?
Well, Uday, aid could be anything. I mean, right now Sri Lanka needs pretty much everything. I mean, from clothes to foods to medicines. But I don't want to sound non-altruistic here. But the fact of the matter is that it's a bad coincidence that the crisis has come at a time when the whole world, including India, is going through very, very difficult economic times. Because why is this statement coming from me, Uday? If I go to the root of it, the problem is that Sri Lanka right now, if something that Sri Lanka needs most, without a doubt, I think all of my panelists would agree, are dollars. Because I think the crisis is emanated out of lack of imports. The crisis emanated out of the fact that they do not have foreign exchange with them, either to repay their debts or to import important stuff into their country. And as far as India is concerned, India is doing its best. I mean, food, medicines, $3.5 billion already, in cash and kind, everything included, the credit line. But the fact is that India's own forex reserves have been under pressure. We had, at one point, at the peak, touched $640 billion. From there, we are now down to $588 billion. When if I calculate that, we've got just about enough for about 9 to 10 months of imports. And at the same time, we should not, I would like to again, interrupt myself and say that I'm not sounding non-altruistic. I don't want to sound that way. So we've got 9 to 10 months left, and the kind of speed at which the rupee is rising, RBI's currency swaps are required more often than not, So therefore, for India to spare more dollars may be a tough call, because we've got a population of 140 crore to look after. Sri Lanka is the size of Delhi actually, probably 2.2 crores, add a little bit here and there to Delhi. And that's Sri Lankan, I think the best that India can do right now is scout around. I agree with Joyita, because people, I repeat what I said on your show yesterday, I would like to reiterate, that people just don't die out of rockets and missiles. People die out of hunger. And I agree with Joyita that, situation could be even worse in Sri Lanka. If a missile is fired on an apartment block, probably people in that apartment block suffer. But here's a missile, an economic missile, which has been hit on Sri Lanka, where the entire country is suffering. So I think the Western nations, the G7, the IMFs, the World Banks, I think it is time for these people to probably bend their rules a bit. They should not be that strict with a country which is actually helpless at this point of time. IMF has got its rule. You must reduce your taxes. You have to bring in this policy. You have to bring in that policy. We will then give you the credit line. Agree. But I think extraordinary situation demands extraordinary action as well. So I think for a moment, as an emergency measure, the World Banks and the IMF and the G7 countries who boast of their wealth, who sit around a table and talk about big things, $100 billion sanctioned against Russia. So if they can spend this money for subduing Russia, even 5% of that money, my calculation says, Uday, 5% of the money which has been doled out on Ukraine or in subduing Russia would be sufficient to take Sri Lanka out of this crisis. My calculation says $5 billion immediate relief to Sri Lanka will make it come out of the situation. But here's a rider. There has to be a government, because you cannot dole out this money to just a rule of people, a rule of mob. Whom do you give it right now? There's no government there. Who's in control of the funds? Who's in control of the treasury? If suppose it has to happen today or tomorrow, there is no government there. So I think I agree, whereas I agree that India should not interfere with the political formations in Sri Lanka. At the same time, any country which wants to give the aid, including India, will not like to give it to a country which is governmentless, which has not got a government at this point of time. So I think government formation, whether it is people's government or an all-party government or a speaker's government, whatever it is, some kind of treasury control has to be there. for any country to dole out money, and I think the most needed commodity, Uday, before I wrap up this statement of mine, is the dollar right now. Food, medicines, agreed, they are all going. I mean, India has been doing its bit, but I think dollars and dollars is what Sri Lanka needs right now, from where this whole problem has emanated.